Right. Good evening, everyone. A few familiar faces in here. Welcome to the 4th New Zealand Music Producer Series. A couple of thank yous before we start. Really want to thank all the sponsors who helped me put this on. Recorded Music New Zealand, APRA, NZ On Air, Auckland Council, Auckland and UNESCO City of Music, the New Zealand Music Commission. Also, we have a coffee sponsor this year because musicians drink so much coffee, Matt Atkinson. And I'd like to thank all the guys at Roundhead Studios, Paddy and all his team. Amazing job putting this on. It's been fantastic. A couple of things about the New Zealand Music Producer Series, which I repeat every year. The goal is to bring great producers here to help upskill and teach producers and engineers working in New Zealand. And a chance for us as producers and engineers to network and integrate. Because it can be quite a solitary profession, and it's quite nice that we can actually hang out together and be in rooms together and exchange ideas and work together on things. Let's give you a little bit of background on tonight's guest. He has an impressive career working with a varied range of artists, including Red Hot Chili Peppers, Adele, Metallica, Black Sabbath, Beyonce, Hozier, Green Day, Lana Del Rey, Justin Timberlake, U2, and Jay-Z. If that's not varied, CV enough. He's also received 3 Grammy Awards, one for his work on Stadium Arcadium, Chili Peppers album, Adele's 21, and Ziggy Marley's Fly Rasta. He started playing as a musician, playing jazz trumpet, but was more interested in working in the sound and recording arena. This led him to study at the University of Miami. After graduation, he spent time working for Clavier, then went on the road with Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson. He honed his craft working with producers such as Rob Cavallo, Don Was, and Rick Rubin. Working out of his studio in Van Nuys, California, he built an impressive range of vintage equipment, which was also used to model his range of the Waves audio plugins. He became a pioneer of in-the-box mixing, and his techniques are widely used and admired throughout the recording industry. Please welcome the legendary Andrew Scheps.
Hello. I'm a legend in my own lunchtime.
You are a legend, Andrew. And so, it'd be nice to talk about some sort of general music industry stuff first before we get into all the tech stuff. And what do you feel are the most fundamental changes to the music industry since you started recording?
Well,
it's a wide question.
Yeah, look, I'm old, so I came in pretty much in the middle of the analog to digital transition. So I learned on analog tape, analog consoles, but at Miami we had a 3M digital 4-track machine that was like the size of that piano, basically, and it sucked. But we had one. So it was the sort of beginning of that, and then working for New England Digital, they made the Synclavier, which was one of the first kind of digital things. So it was an FM synthesizer with a sample-accurate sequencer, and then monophonic sampling, and then polyphonic sampling, and then hard disk recording, kind of before anyone else, not anyone else, because Fairlight and Waveframe were around at the same time. But anyway, very early on in that sort of thing, and then I was a very early Pro Tools adopter. So I was always a geek and ahead of the curve, but the curve was there for me to be ahead of. I was just an early adopter. I didn't make any of it happen. But I think really it's just been that progression has just gotten even more, because when Pro Tools started being Pro Tools and made companies like New England Digital basically go out of business overnight, like the Sony 3348, which was a 48-track tape machine, digital tape machine, went from being worth $125,000 to $5,000 overnight. Because all of a sudden, you didn't need it because there were ADATs and DA88s. And then you didn't need other things because computers got to the point where you could actually edit multi-track audio. And then all of a sudden, you didn't need to record it to tape and transfer it. You could just record it straight into the computer. And so all of these are just steps and steps and steps to the point where now you can make a record on your phone. And why wouldn't you?
So what was the so is your background a tech background then? Or do you feel it's a musical background?
It's both. I'm a total geek. I always took stuff apart and sometimes put it back together, which my parents loved. But I loved, like, you could push a button and something else would happen. Like, I discovered the lighting console in my junior high school, and like, oh, that's cool. and so learned that, and then that sort of transferred itself into console. So when I first saw my first recording console, I just thought, that's it. That has so many buttons, and I would get to push all of them and turn all of those knobs, and stuff would happen. So I love that thing, but at the same time, I actually started on French horn and then went to trumpet because maybe that was slightly cooler. But it still wasn't as cool as playing guitar or drums. So then I started doing live sound for bands, and that was how I would be sort of in a band, but not in a band. And then the University of Miami was kind of the perfect marriage of the two. It's a music major, but a minor in electrical engineering. But then instead of having electives where you could take underwater basket weaving or whatever, you took recording classes. So the electives were microphone techniques, acoustics, which is one of the hardest classes I've ever taken in my life. So much math. So it was always a very, very geeky underpinning to the creative side of making music and then recording music.
So, so what was the first studio that what was that studio you went into that you first saw a desk? What was your initial sort of step into recording studios?
Well, I mean, that studio, I have no idea what it was called. It was basically friends of my parents, and probably sort of friends of my parents, had a son who worked at a studio in New York City, and I was living on Long Island. And so yes, I'll go look at that. Thank you very much. And I got on a train and I went into the city and I met this guy and he kind of showed me around. And I think they did jingles and voiceover or stuff. I mean, they didn't make records. I wasn't there during a session to observe anything. I basically got a little tour of the studio and then get the hell out and see you later. But that's when I first saw it. So that made me think oh, that's it. And I started reading Mix Magazine cover to cover. And Ken Pullman, if you go back to old Mix magazines, he was writing all the articles about digital audio. He was the first sort of guy to try to educate on digital audio, and he was the head of the recording program at the University of Miami. And so I thought, well, that's obvious. That's where I'm going to go, because my parents said you have to go get a degree. So do that. But then from there, working in the studios at the school, those were the first studios I ever actually worked in. I didn't get to go do stuff as a kid. My parents were English teachers. There was no kind of history of it.
So how did you make because you did a lot of programming work in sort of on Michael Jackson records, and so how did you break into that area? Was that through being a studio assistant, or was that specifically for the Synclavier job? Or?
No, it was the Synclavier job. So when I graduated from University of Miami, what most people did who said well, I want to make records, is you went and you were an intern at a studio, because that's what you did, because every city was full of studios like this instead of there only being a couple. But a friend of mine who graduated the year before was working for New England Digital and said hey, they got an opening in the LA office. Do you want to do that? And so I had the option to work at New England Digital and have a salary and get paid, or I could work for free at a studio and clean toilets. And I thought, well, I'll go do this paid thing. That sounds cool. And that it fed my geekiness. I loved doing that. And then because of that, I met lots of people, and then that would turn into Synclavier programming work and then MIDI programming work and blah, blah, blah. So it just came in sideways, really.
So from the programming side of it, obviously you were programming for quite very high-profile artists. So how did you make that transition from programming into engineering and then into production? I appreciate it's probably a long
Yeah,
timeline,
I mean, it's just being in the room.
Yeah.
The real thing behind it is the implosion of the music industry. So as budgets shrank, the number of people who could be in the room shrank. And when it really hit, because home studios started taking off and piracy started with Napster, et cetera, so the money started getting sucked out of the record industry, which was all made up money in the first place. They were just printing money and having drug parties in the 70s. But not all.
It was a fun time.
Most of them. Yeah, great times. Good times. So, but what would happen is on every even slightly well-funded record, you would have a producer, an engineer, an assistant, and then you would have maybe a second assistant as a tape op, and if it was this kind of record, you would have a synth programmer, and then that would turn into you would have a Pro Tools guy, because then Pro Tools became a big part of making most records, whether it was just editing, even if you recorded on tape. But then at some point, the budgets dropped to where, okay, now the engineers have to run Pro Tools. And there were a lot of amazing old school engineers who just stopped working because you could deal with someone who could run Pro Tools and sort of engineer, but you couldn't deal with an amazing engineer who could sort of run Pro Tools. Because that would mean you'd have these amazing sounds coming out of the speakers, but you couldn't record them. So it'd be better to have mediocre sounds, but you could record them. So to be honest, I mean, that's how I started moving sideways.
So it was the benefit of the contraction of the industry.
Yeah.
And it changed it for everybody. I mean, it was like...
Absolutely. I mean, now, really if you're not wearing every hat, it's a good day.
Yeah. It's so if you had to pick several albums that kind of, or several sessions that really changed that gave your career a massive boost, changed your perception, people's perception of you in the industry, what would those records be? Would they be as an engineer? Would they be as
Well, I mean, obviously the Michael Jackson record was a big deal. That was the first record that I worked on the whole time. It was after I'd been on tour taking care of the Synclaviers, and then they were going to start making the History record, and I was supposed to fly to New York for 3 days to set up the Synclavier, get it out of storage from the tour, set it up, and then they'd be fine. And then they realized, well, but nobody here knows how to run it. Well, I do. So I went for 3 days and stayed for a year and a half, basically. And so that was huge. I mean, because not only Bruce Swedian was the main engineer, and if you don't know who he is, just look him up. And he started with Duke Ellington and then Thriller. That's him. So
not much of a CV.
Yeah, nothing. And nothing, no. So he was there, but then also the number of people who came in. I mean, Teddy Riley came in for a few weeks, just programming. And Steve Porcaro from Toto, a keyboard player, came in, and they didn't know well, where are we going to put him? We'll put him in with Andrew in this other room. And so I was down the street in another studio with Steve Porcaro for a month, and all we did was program synths and okay. And I guess I'm engineering that now because who else was there? So it was just me. So that was huge, just for the opportunities and also for all the stuff I did.
So what were the stress levels like when you had to play what you were doing to Michael?
Playing it for Michael was easy. It was all the other dickheads hanging around. No, it's a big crew. And yes, you're recording this, so that'll just be oh my God, there's a technical problem. No, it's not anything on that level. There are always people hanging around. And some of those people are super talented and some of them aren't. But whether they're talented or not, there are a lot of people who get weird about their gig. And anybody else in the room who seems talented is a threat. And so stuff can get political and odd. So overall, it was great. Everybody was super cool. But there were always a lot of weird technical stuff, political stuff. But the playing stuff for Michael was absolutely fine because all he did was listen. And if he liked it, it was awesome. And if he didn't, okay, let's do something else. And he'd kind of beatbox what he wanted or give you an idea. And then you'd go off and try and make it happen. Yeah.
It sounds insanely stressful to me.
It was. Yeah. I mean, it was. It was 6 or 7 days a week, 12 to 18 hours a day for a year and a half. Yeah. And living in a hotel for most of it because it was in New York with my wife and son, who was 2. My son was actually banned from Rockefeller Center for going in the fountain too many times. So, yeah, I mean, crazy stressful, but also, I mean, if you think about it, when was that? That was 92 or something. So, I'm 25 and I'm on this record with the biggest artist in the world, period. So
it's a good starting point.
It's a really good starting point. And I learned a ton. I mean, working with Bruce and with Steve and with Eddie Delana and all the other people who would come in. I mean, we had Trevor Rabin come in just to play guitar on one song. And so he was there for a couple of days. And then Slash came in for a couple of days. And that guy... That was awesome. Anyway, enough said. So there was a lot going on in that session that was great, but it was more just about the education, being able to learn how to be in that kind of situation. And the Synclavier job had really trained me for that, though, because... So the Synclavier was really, really, really expensive. So the people who had them had a lot of money, and they were in the middle of really big sessions, and they would break, and my job was to fix them. I would have to get in a van with a bunch of spare parts and show up at the studio and fix them. Sometimes it would be low stress, it broke last night, I'm a film composer, I just didn't work. But sometimes there's an orchestra waiting to record. Let's go. So dealing with that stress and seeing that scale of session, it happened pretty much immediately out of school for me. So that just took that to be the norm.
Yeah.
You know, that there were no limitations to what you would do if you were trying to make a record.
And it's that old thing about the jobs where you learn the most tend to be the most stressful ones, because you just have to make decisions at the spur of the moment and make things work and not show any fear. You know, so it's a pretty good way to learn.
Yeah, people can smell fear.
Yeah. So moving from programming, and so I can see how the engineering transition. So the transition from engineering to production, I mean, was that quite a smooth thing, or was it always you ended up engineering and then kind of doing a bit of production, and then it became more?
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, it feels like this incredibly slow day after day after day, and it's just a climb, and nothing's ever happened that's been a jump.
Yeah.
From the outside, it seems like there's some huge jumps. Yeah. Like mixing 99 Problems was a massive jump. Nobody thought of me as a mixer, and then I mixed 99 Problems, and now all of a sudden, okay, you're a mixer. And as a producer, I mean, I was making EPs with friends. There's some stuff I did in my garage that I still absolutely love, and it was just like no money and my buddies, and we'd do that. And that was long before I had produced anything for money. But then I don't know. I mean, the transitions always seem really slow when they're your transitions. Yeah. And I think that's why I'm still around, because there are people who have really big transitions, and usually it doesn't work in your favor because you don't have the history to sort of back you up. And also, like my discography, I mean, you know, you read that list. Yeah. And it's nuts, but you're not cherry picking to make it nuts. Like, that's how stupid my discography is. But what it means is that nobody pigeonholes. So I know some engineers, great engineers, who had very early success, like mixing a disco record. Number one, the first thing they ever mixed, number one, disco record. Like, holy shit, that's amazing. Yeah. But when disco stops, nobody wants to hire you because that's your entire discography is disco. So now you're done. But you're way more talented than me, but I've done so many weird little things along the way that it doesn't matter. I'm not set to a time.
You know, because I remember when I had discussions about bringing you here to do the series, and people say, you know, so what's Andrew done? And I said, well, he's mixed Metallica and Beyonce, and they'd look at me like kind of strange, like how is it possible to work in those such diverse areas? And then you go into more depth and you reggae records, and it's like, how do you approach it? Do you just approach it like an Andrew Scheps record, or do you approach it like, I need to really work and discover this genre before I mix it?
Neither, really. I think I like to think that I'm always mixing what I'm given. So it's never my record. You know, I'm not trying to imprint myself on it. But at the same time, I just make everything how I want to hear it. And how I want to hear things is like really exciting guitar bands. I would be super happy if everything in the world was a guitar band. Like, that's my favorite thing. But at the same time, I love mixing jazz records and trying to make them explode, or a classical record and making it explode, or a hip-hop record and making it explode. Everything just needs to explode and be super exciting. And that's it. So my approach is always the same. I mean, for the people who were in the seminar for the last 2 days, I opened up a ton of different sessions in different genres, and they all look identical. Like, there's no, like, oh, I do this for this type of thing and this thing. I don't think that way, and I'm always just trying to make the exploding version of what I was given, I guess. Yeah. And there are times, though, when you have to be true to the genre. Like on the Ziggy Marley record, the one song, Fly Rasta, is a very old-school, up-tempo reggae track, and it has Uroy, who is one of the legendary MCs from Jamaica, on it. Right. So that one had to sound like that. But the rest of that album has a lot of pop elements in it, and so I can make it sound like anything I want. But every once in a while, there is something where you've got to study and do it right.
I mean, is there a genre that you find more difficult than others? Or is it a pretty level playing field?
Everything's difficult all the time.
Yeah, that's been really interesting watching the last few days. Is firstly how deprecating, yeah.
Or depreciating. I am worth much less than I was yesterday.
How self-deprecating you are about your own work, and you know, sort of. There's no element of kind of like, look how great I am. It's like, you know, I'm just trying to do my thing, and it's like, but it all sounds amazing. You know, everything you put
Well-
on just sounds great, and it's like, you know, that shouldn't be too sort of, you know, kind.
Well, thanks.
But it just astounded me how many different genres they all sounded great. I wouldn't even know where to start with half the genres you work in. So it's
And I think that's, if I thought about it, I'd probably get stuck.
yeah, it's probably why I stopped mixing though. So, yeah, you know.
But it's that thing, you start a mix and you hit play and you hear what's there and you immediately just say, ooh, I want it to do a bit more of that, or wow, that's cool, let me make that gigantic, or it's just immediately responding to the source material, and it doesn't matter what the genre is at that point.
I mean, the other thing that I didn't really know until I started researching you was how much tracking you do as well. In my mind, I'd always thought of you as a mix engineer because of your CV. But I mean, do you have a preference for tracking or mixing, or is it just? And how do you approach mixing the sessions you've tracked yourself? Do you have a different workflow, or it's?
I mean, what sucks about that is everything's my fault at that point, right? You can't like sit around and say, well, the drums aren't happening because they suck. It's like, well, I recorded those too, so it's my fault. And that it is actually difficult, you know. But it's also difficult to get enough perspective to say, I might need to really, really change something that I just made this way. But maybe that was a bad idea. So that's difficult, but we were talking about it in the seminar, and I'm very good about changing hats. Like while I'm tracking, there's nothing going on in the session. It's like a piece of multi-track tape, and maybe there's a compressor that I'm sending the kick and snare to. But that's it. I don't listen with lots of plugins and all the kind of stuff I will do while mixing. But as soon as I start mixing, import the template, everything changes, and now I'm mixing. So they're very, very different things to me. Yeah. So while you're producing and tracking, you're solving problems musically or with an overdub or with a background vocal part or by taking a guitar part out or something like that. And while you're mixing, you're just sonically trying to make it explode. To, you know, this will be the theme of the night, everything's got to explode. Yeah. But I mean, that's what you're doing, and it's a totally different job. Yeah. I hate when I'm in the middle of a mix of something I've produced and think like, well, we should probably overdub something. Like, well, no. We did this. I did a rough mix that everybody's happy with. The arrangements there, the performance is there. Yeah. My mix must suck if I feel like I need to overdub. Yeah. And then every once in a while you miss something, so you overdub. But preference-wise, I think my favorite thing is pre-production, though, because then I don't have to do anything except listen and have really bad ideas.
Yeah. Pre-production is fun. It's a really underrated part of recording, I feel.
Oh, God, it's huge. And you almost never get to do it separately anymore. Yeah. For me, pre-production is like the first hour on each song. Yeah. And then you're tracking.
I always try and at least get like the day before the session in a room where there's no pressure kind of thing. It's just such an, you know, just getting, especially if you're bringing in musicians as well who've never played on the song, just to have it, even if it's just an hour or something, or 2 hours, just to, so you're not going in looking like an idiot in front of you know, so, but yeah, you know, I think it's a fun part. Yeah. You know, admittedly, you're in rooms that usually smell of beer and old cigarettes, but they kind of, you know, then you feel like there's no pressure then.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no risk in pre-production. Well, I mean, there's some, but not like there is while you're paying a bunch of money to track somewhere, or And
I think just having time with the musicians where they don't feel under pressure as well. Yeah. I think it's kind of really invaluable. But you know, I've done many sessions where the first time you meet the artist is on the first day of the session, and it's like 5 minutes in, you're like, I don't know if we're going to get on really. This could be a tough few weeks, you know.
And is that guy really the bass player?
Yeah. So you were the first mix engineer that I even heard the phrase "in the box" about, you know. And there's always been the Andrew Scheps myths. Like the first time someone mentioned you to me, they said, and he mixed an Adele record on the train with headphones on. And so I believed that for years until you told me it was a lie.
That's not true.
And of course the classic, he never uses his own plugins thing, you know. So
if you're here for the last 2 days, you saw it's the only thing I use. Like, why would you build something like that?
And why would someone start that myth? It just seems like
I don't know. You know. I don't look. Gear Sluts is a dangerous place. It's weird. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. People love to hate or something, like, I don't know. But it seems crazy to me to get the opportunity to build a plugin with people who are super smart and can actually make it sound like whatever you say you want it to sound like, and not build the thing that you want.
Yeah. But it's so Tell us all about the transition you made from, because you've got a lot of beautiful gear. I've seen your gear at Mono Valley. Where I've seen when I say I've seen pictures of it, and I know the studio well, and it's it's incredible equipment, and I know engineers who work there, and it's just like Andrew's stuff is amazing. But why did you decide to make that transition? Is that why I'm not going to use this great gear anymore. I'm just going to stay in the box, it seems like a huge transition, especially as you did it so early on, before anybody else I knew was doing it.
Well, I mean, it wasn't actually that early on. I mean, Chad Blake had been doing it for a few years by then. I mean, the first song, and I don't know why this sticks in my head, but Livin' La Vida Loca was mixed entirely in Pro Tools, and it won a Grammy. And that was the first song to ever win a Grammy that had been mixed in Pro Tools. And what year is that song? Is that 2002 or something? I have no idea. Somebody with a phone, look that up and call it out. But so, I mean, it had been happening for a while. And actually, I mixed in the box because that's the only thing I had before I bought a bunch of gear. And then I bought a bunch of gear, so I'm going to use the hell out of that gear. And I started with a Mackie console. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and said, I'm going to have a 64 input Neve. That's not the way that happens. But anyway, the decision to go back into Pro Tools completely, not with gear, there's no summing, there's no nothing. I've got a laptop in there and a UAD satellite to run their plugins, and that's what I mix on. And it's not like a joke rig, that's it. It came from a lot of things. I'd been mixing on the console for a long time, and if you mix on a console, you can mix exactly one song at a time, unless they're really small songs. And I have actually mixed 2 songs at the same time on different halves of the console. And it's a logistic nightmare, but you can do it. But that means you have to schedule time, and you're not just scheduling time for yourself, you have to schedule time for every other person who's involved in the project. The A&R people, the manager, the band, every member of the band who decides they want to have input on the mix. Sometimes they're significant others who want input on the mix. You have to accommodate it in real time. This mix is on the console. All of the knobs are turned to where this mix sounds like this mix. And if I take the time to document it, first of all, it takes an hour and a half. It's this much paper. And I'm doing it by just standing over these knobs that are this tall, which means there's parallax as you move. So you can't just take a bunch of pictures of the console because you're only ever over one knob. So you have to be leaning, and my quads were much better when I was doing this. You'd be leaning on the console with a pad and trying not to drip sweat all over it because they're really hot. And it would take about an hour and a half to do the documentation. And I would get quicker at it. So I think by the end, I could usually document a mix in the same time it took to print all of the versions. So an hour 15. And then you get a call 3 days later, hey, that's great. Can we turn the hi-hat up a little bit in the choruses? No. It's well, yeah, we can, but you got to wait for 3 weeks because now I'm mixing another record, and their mixes are all over the console, and I can't take a mix down, recall your mix, turn the hi-hat up, and then print it, and then take your mix down and then put the other mix back up. Because first of all, when I take this mix down and then put it back up, it won't sound the same. Second of all, your mix doesn't sound the same when I've put it back up, because in the 3 intervening days, the temperature has changed, they've switched the power grid, and 3 modules have died, so I've moved them inside the console. It didn't work. And so you would start to not touch things. Okay, that EQ should be fine for the kick drum for the rest of my life. Just leave it. Don't touch that. And that's not the way to mix. You need to hear the kick drum and go, well, I want to do that. No, I don't like that. I want to do this. And you want to be able to change everything all the time. And I got to the point where I was scared to do it. So it was logistics. Yeah. And then also, it was the fact that every mix I was printing looked like it was right heavy, but the vocal sounded like it was in the middle. And I'd take them into mastering, and we'd have a look at them, and the guy would go, wow, that's weird. And we never figured out why that was. There was some frequency that was building up on one side and not the other, and then it's God, there's not enough headroom in these EQs. So it's not like I was in the holy grail analog world of goodness and I moved just because logistics and money. It was also that stuff sucked about mixing analog. Yeah. The headroom thing, the recall thing, all of that stuff really, really sucked. And so it took me a long time to get over myself and not think like the gear was my magic, because you do think that. I mean, I thought, well, man, no one's ever going to hire me ever, because now I'm not using the gear. But if that were the case, all you got to do to be a mixer and win some Grammys is buy some gear. And if that were true, well, you'd sell a lot more gear, probably. But, I mean, that can't be true, so therefore the gear isn't why the stuff sounds good. Yeah. And there was real panic as I made the transition. Yeah. And I guess the source of the story you heard is it was actually a Lady Gaga mix, which didn't end up getting used, I don't think. Or maybe it did. But it was something that Rick Rubin was producing, and I'd just done the Mix with the Masters seminar. Spread out all over the console, patching up all the gear. We'd spent a week moving faders and knobs and talking about how great all the gear was. And then Rick said, hey, you want to mix this song? And I thought, well, I'm not going to be home for 2 weeks. They need it faster than that. Yeah. And I had my laptop because I was working on something else, just like editing or something. And I just said yes. And like the worst thing that'll happen is I'll send him a mix. He'll say, wow, that sounds like shit. And I'd say, oh, well, I'm traveling, don't worry about it, have someone else do it. Like, it was a good test for it. And I sent the mix thinking, like, this is terrible. And I got back normal mix comments. Like, all right, I guess this is working. And I just kept going at that point. So that was a really long answer. No,
it's good. No, because it's such an interesting area, because it's changed the way that we all work in the industry.
Yeah.
But,
and now I absolutely love it. There is nothing I miss about mixing analog, and I would never, ever, ever do it again. I'm serious. Yeah. People are like, yeah, but if you had like a jazz record or you're doing a punk record, like they come up with all kinds of things that would be like, yeah, but you do that analog, right? Like, no. Why would I do that? I've got such a thing going, and I can work fast, and I've got all perspective because I don't have to work on the mix by itself until it's done and then work on the next song. I can work on the entire album at the same time. There are a million reasons to do it, and I love all of those reasons.
I mean, just describing it just took me to a really dark place. That you up till crazy hours, and then you send the mix off, and it's like you're on another session, and it's just like, and it does never sound the same. I've never done a recall that sounds...
and it's never better. It should be. Yeah. Wouldn't that be awesome? Like, if half the time it sounded better? Yeah. And it never does. It's always like, there's something wrong with the snare. Yeah. And you can't figure it out. And so you compromise, and now the snare's worse.
Have you ever just renamed the file and sent it back the same way?
No, I'm not good at lying. No, but what I started doing a lot is if I got something like, turn the hi-hat up in the chorus, like, great, I'm going to put the mix in the Pro Tools session with the hi-hat track, and I'm going to bounce a new one in Pro Tools. And then I started doing more and more of that, but because of stupid technical crap with the way I mix, I couldn't just like print stems. There are a lot of guys like Manny Markin mixes on the console, tons of gear, and then prints stems before he ever even prints the first mix, and then makes the first mix out of the stems, and that way his recalls are all in the box. Right. But it's the benefit of the console and all of the outboard gear. Yeah. But I share too many compressors between things, and the stems don't add up to the mix. So really, I'd just be mixing in the box anyway. Like, do I really need to bounce the kick drum through a piece of gear? No. So then don't even bother. And that just took all of that stuff away and made me say, just get over it and mix in the box.
I mean, it's often people who've not had to deal with mixing in an analog format who are the ones who kind of champion it. It's like the myth of tape, how great. We had this discussion yesterday about sort of, tape is great, it's amazing. And it's like, it was rubbish. It was really shitty working to tape, wasn't it? It was just
a lot of the time, yeah. I mean, there's some magic to it, but it comes with bad magic as well. I mean, it magically changes the sound of absolutely everything you try to record. That's not always a good thing,
like non-transient drum sounds.
Yeah, I mean, the example we were saying, and I think every engineer who worked on tape or has ever worked on tape will tell you this happens at the beginning of every tracking date, is the tape machine is in input, you patch in all your microphones, you get your sounds, you push up faders, and like, great, this sounds awesome, let's record a little bit so the drummer can hear it. You record a little bit, you hit rewind, and you hit play. Fuck. Because something doesn't work. You're peaking too loud, but the VU meters are slow, so you can't even tell, but it's a little bit distorted, or now it's noisy, and he's playing really quiet, so now I got to crank everything up a little. Like, there are lots and lots of things that change when you go to tape. It's not always better, it's just different.
I mean, I think there there are methods of working that we used to do to tape. You know, I still comp vocals very much like I would be doing to tape. You know, you're listening for all the performance and tuning.
Well, committing to performances, committing to sounds. The fact, like, you get a really great guitar solo and the guitar player wants to do another one, like, are you sure? There are no playlists here, and I'm out of tracks. So if you play it again, the old one's gone forever. And that used to just be obvious, and now that's a real concept to people. Like, no, you can't just try it again to see. You got to decide in advance if it's worth trying to beat it. So it's amazing to be able to say you can always find out if that was the best solo you can play. But at the same time, what you'll end up doing is you'll have 9 pretty good solos that you think, I'm going to comp something later. Don't worry about it. And then you don't.
So do you have... like say with Chris Oraldi has, you'll send a set of, you have to print these plugins in, you have to do, these are the things I want when you just present the mix to me. Do you have a set of rules that you send to the artist or the engineer, that how you want the sessions presented?
I just wanted exactly where you left off, actually. I mean, I think I know Pro Tools really, really well, so I can get a session that's sort of a mess, but for me, I can figure out really quickly what's going on. Yeah. So I don't need stuff cleaned up, and I would much rather have the session balanced the way everybody's been listening for the past 2 months than to get it completely stripped out and clean, and it sounds nothing like what everybody's been hearing, and I can't even figure out why.
Because you were talking about automation the other day, about some people stripping out all the automation, and you kind of want to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's not automation, just balances. Yeah. Okay, so who in this room has ever recorded an electric guitar? Who in this room has recorded an electric guitar performance to more than 1 track? Pretty much the same number of hands. Okay, so that means you now have a balance because you've tracked at least 2 microphones to separate tracks. Maybe you've got 3 microphones and a DI and a room mic. So now you've got 5 tracks for every single guitar performance. You recorded it, you balanced it. How many of you have gone back a month after recording those guitars and meticulously rebalanced them? There's not a single hand that's going to go up. Whatever balance happened in the moment is exactly what that guitar sounds like to you and will always sound like to you because it's what you've been listening to for months. It's what you sang to. It's why you decided to put some B3 on there. Whatever it is, that's the guitar sound. But then, oh, we're going to send this out to get mixed. Great, put all the faders at 0.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me.
I take it it's happened to you.
All the time. It happened last week.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you get like the response when you say like, hey, is there any way I could get, like, okay, fine, don't give me your plugin, like whatever, but could I just get the balance and the panning? Just so I've got the guitar arrangement the way you built it. And the thing that just makes me want to kill people is to say, no, man, just do your thing. All right, I'm going to do my thing and you're not going to like it because it doesn't include your thing. Let me start with your thing and then I'll do my thing to your thing. You don't want just my thing. If you did, I would have produced and recorded your record. That's...
Does that make you angry than spelling rough mix RUFF? Which seems to be a bit of a bugbear of yours.
Yeah, I don't like that much either.
Yeah. So when we had Sylvia Massey here last year, she was recounting lots of Rick Rubin stories, you know, because we all want to know about Rick, because there are more myths about Rick than there are about you. So you know, it'd be really interesting. Maybe give us insight on one of the sessions, maybe the Chili Peppers. I mean, you won a Grammy for it, so it must have been a good job. And I believe it was all analog. That
Stadium Arcadium was all analog. The band decided they wanted to track to tape, which they did. There was some background vocal. No, actually, all the background vocals that John did were done to tape. There was some percussion overdubs at the very end that were done to Pro Tools because we'd run out of tracks because we were just doing 2 analog 24 tracks. Then it was mixed on a Neve, had to be mixed on a Neve. Ryan Hewitt mixed half, I mixed half, but we were both on Neve 8068s. And it was mixed 2 half-inch tapes. So if you buy the vinyl of Stadium Arcadium, it's been analog all the way through. It's never, ever been digitized, any part of it, because it was mastered analog for vinyl. Obviously, if you buy the CD or the download, it's digital. So it got digitized off the half-inch. But yeah, that was just a specific thing that the band decided they wanted to do at the beginning of the process.
So it wasn't Rick Rubin's idea to do that? It was
No. That was the band. That's what they wanted to do.
So, how is it to work with Rick? Is it as hard as Sylvia said it is?
Well, what'd Sylvia
was?
say?
She just said they're very difficult sessions, And
Look,
it's
I mean, the thing, and it's what makes Rick a great producer, is he wants to hear what he wants to hear.
Yeah.
He doesn't care that might be a really difficult thing to pull off.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. He would also like it to be the temperature he would like it to be inside and outside. Like, it's just, the universe needs to be the way the universe needs to be. And there's, in a good way, there's no thought to, oh, wow, Andrew's going to have to stay up all night to do that. Maybe I shouldn't ask. Like, no, that's what needs to happen. So, there were holiday weekends on records. Like, I still remember on the first Audio Slave record where it might have been July 4th, actually. And so July 4th was, I think, on the Monday. And so on the Friday, it's like, yep, we're going to be done. No, July 4th was on the Saturday. So on the Friday night, like, great, we're going to be done. And then as they're walking out of the room, like, cool, man, can we get some roughs? And like, there are 26 songs or something. I don't remember how many songs. And so Dave Schiffman, the other engineer, and I just looked at each other like, okay, these are going to be the fastest rough mixes we have ever done. And we found like weird ways to do stuff. We were like generating MP3s in real time in Pro Tools by doing a bounce to disc while rolling the tape, and like just create anything we could do to save time. And we were still there till 3 or 4 in the morning. Yeah. And that's, but that's just the reality of it. And there isn't a reason that he should be compromising because I might get tired. That's not the gig, is it?
Yeah, that was kind of the gist of Sylvia. It's just like, stuff has to be done. And I guess,
Yeah.
But they were fun sessions, or they were just incredibly grueling. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No. I mean, and I'm not going to say anything. Now, look, there were some amazing sessions. The Chili Peppers were one of my favorite bands forever. I mean, I saw them live in 1986 in a punk club in Miami. They're incredible, and to be able to actually work with them was just absolutely insane. And it was just Rick, Anthony, and me for lead vocals on 3 consecutive records. Yeah. And I'm just in the room doing that. Like, are you joking? That's the coolest thing ever. Yeah. And some of the stuff I got to do working with Weezer, where we decided to record in the Civic Center in Malibu. So it's like a 400 or 500 seat venue, but they were just set up all over the stage, and I was set up at front of house, and like, it was really super loud, and that was awesome. I mean, there's just so many things you get to do that you're never gonna do. Yeah. Look, I got to record U2 and Green Day in Abbey Road Studio 2. You don't get to do that if you're not working with good producers. It's all worth it.
So it's a trade-off. You take the good, and you sort of and you deal. No one. You don't do this job because it's an easy job.
No,
it's hard work. The hours are long. You know, it's like, I think you're one of the few producers I know that's on one marriage. It's like,
I have a very special wife. Yeah. That's what that is.
Yes, and it's but there's so many myths about Rick. So it's
well, look, I mean, the incredible talent of Rick is that he is always a listener.
Yeah,
he is a producer who produces like a fan. He wants to hear the best record by whatever band he's working with that he's ever heard. Yeah. And he's just always listening. And like, nope, that's not the best Black Sabbath record I've heard yet. Yeah. How are we going to fix that? So you do.
Yeah. Did you work on the record with most of it was cut live? Was it?
On which? On the
Sabbath? I heard about a Sabbath record.
Yeah.
When Rick came in and tried to get him to record as they used to record, back in the day with Bloody Sabbath and
exactly, but they didn't do it in 2 days while on acid, which was
Did you try?
No. That's actually, it's one of my favorite things ever. There's an interview. It was at a music conference thing in Ibiza, and George Clinton I was there. Don't ask why; it doesn't matter. But George Clinton was there, and he was the keynote interview. And so they were interviewing about the first. I guess it was the first P-Funk record, which that's another record that was made in 2 days while on acid. So those are 2 records made pretty much at the same time in 2 days on acid, and they couldn't be more different or more the same in some ways. But so they asked him, so why did you do that? And he said, well, we could only afford 2 days of studio time, and we were always on acid. So what the hell else were they going to do?
Yeah. It seems so obvious.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like it was a choice.
So, albums or artists that inspired you to be involved in music? Was there a particular group of albums that you thought that suddenly sort of you put on and, like for me it was actually some of the early Sabbath records and Dark Side of the Moon, and you put it on and said, that's amazing. That, I want to do something like that.
I think the first record that ever made me think about like record making is a thing was Revolver, and specifically Tomorrow Never Knows, because like there's no way that's a band. So like, hold on a second. If it's not a band, then what the hell is it? And you just realize really quickly, like, oh, there's something that you do to make a record that might be different. And again, I didn't have anyone in my family that did it, so I didn't have the benefit of knowing what any of it was. So that's like, Mix Magazine, and just sort of trying to find out what it was. And then from there, I mean, anything Brian Eno did, I bought lots of records just because his name was on them. Yeah. And I discovered, for me, the Talking Heads because of his name. And then obviously you go backwards to the Bowie stuff that Visconti did, but Eno played keyboards on. And Eno did not produce the 3 Berlin records for David Bowie. Tony Visconti did, but Eno was there doing keyboards. People say that, Eno produced all that stuff, and he didn't. What else? Definitely some of the Pink Floyd stuff. Yeah. I was a big prog kid. I loved Yes and Jethro Tull, which is not a prog band at all, but those are probably 2 of my favorite bands. So the way Yes albums were put together in pieces and just how crazy all that stuff was, I love that. But I don't when I'm listening to records, I'm never listening to how they're made. I was saying earlier today, like, it took me a long time to realize that Eleanor Rigby is nothing but a double string quartet and vocals, because it's in the middle of a Beatles record that's drums and guitars and bass, and I just like assumed, well, that's drums and guitars and bass too. Like, oh no, it isn't. Yeah. So I'm oblivious to a lot of stuff too.
Yeah. So producers and drummers. So it's come to my sort of knowledge over the years that a lot of producers are drummers or frustrated drummers. Do you fit into either one of those categories?
Well, you added the frustrated because I wanted to play drums. And my parents said, no, you got to play something with a melody.
I mean, why do you think it is? Is it because we're the first into a session? And
I have no idea. I mean, we were talking about it earlier, and I think there is something about, like, some drummers, especially when you're making a rock record, usually the drummer is done after a certain amount of time, and then the rest of the record happens, which is why I actually try not to make records that way. I don't do all the basic tracks at the same time. Do a song and get through at least the lead vocal. You might come back and do percussion and background vocals for everything later on, but get all the other guitars done, whatever, and that keeps the drummer involved. But a lot of records, the drummer's done in 3 or 4 days, and then they got 2 more weeks to hang out, and some of them just do a bunch of drugs, but some of them hang out in the control room. And now they don't have to pay attention to the panic of the fact that they're going to have to get out there and perform again. Like, they're done. So now they can really listen and be a part of the process, and I think maybe that's why a lot of drummers can turn into producers, because they've spent time in the studio without the pressure of having to go out and perform again.
I think there's also that thing of, especially with a lot of drummers who came through the 80s, where you could either embrace programming or just be very traditional in the way you approach things. And a lot of the guys, myself included, we just kind of stepped into programming Lindrums and 808s and 909s and STS5s and things. And and pick up a lot of work that way. So you spend more and more time in the studio, and then it's only a little step into programming bass lines, and then you're doing playing keyboards, and so it's there seems to be a lot of, it's just a crazy amount of drummers do become producers and engineers. Or there's another theory which is so used to getting beaten down by everyone else in the band that we wanted to be in charge. So it's that could be part of it. But,
it could be.
Yeah. Shall we have a little bit chat about how mix engineers get recompensed? Because I know there's been quite a sea change and a real acceptance in recent years that the mix engineers should get points on records. but for a long time that wasn't the case. I mean, I presume that you agree that they should get points on records.
Well, you know what? I don't know what I think. I think I should. No.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. Because, doesn't the tracking engineer have way more to do with making the record than the mix engineer? So shouldn't the tracking engineer get 2 points then if the mix engineer's get... I don't know. It's a weird thing. But if the tradition says I should get one, then I should get one. And there are a lot of records I did not get one.
Yeah.
I'd be wearing nice... I like my shoes, actually. I'd be wearing a nicer shirt if I'd gotten royalties on all the records I've mixed.
I mean, is that due to the rise of the kind of the superstar mix engineer? That they have more power in...
I don't know, because in some... It's sort of geographic as well, because New York and LA, mixers traditionally get 1 point, and it's out of the pool of producer points. And one of the reasons I didn't get mix points is because I was working for producers who commanded more of a royalty because they were so successful. So now there are no more points left. But Nashville... You still can't get a point as a mixer.
Right.
Even for the same label. If you're working for Sony Nashville, which is Sony, you cannot get a point. If you're mixing a country record that was tracked in Nashville for Sony New York, you can. It's just tradition.
I mean, do you think it should be standardized? Do you think there should be...
Again, I don't know. I could easily argue either way.
Yeah.
As a mixer, I will say yes, everybody should have a point.
Yeah. But you make a good point about tracking engineers. It is a huge part of, and probably much more time consuming and
a bigger impact on the record and much more time hanging out with the band. Sometimes I've never met the band. I didn't meet Adele until after the Grammys. Right after, backstage. That's when I met her.
Yeah.
I had to be introduced.
And what was the first thing? Did she want to change any of the mixes? Or?
Yeah, she just said, "Who the hell are you?"
Yeah.
No?
Could have done with more snare.
Yeah, well, you could have told me before it came out.
Hold my Grammy.
Yes.
Yeah. So, how do you deal with... Because obviously the music industry is quite a stressful thing to be working in, and it's and finding a balance, like a work-life balance, is a really difficult thing to do. I mean, how do you deal with those stresses?
I drink heavily. I don't drink heavily. I go to the pub. Seriously, that's what I do.
With Chad Blake, by the looks of it, quite often.
Sometimes,
I quite often see you and Chad's kind of sort of.
Yeah, we do these great hangs. We just call them "We're Thirsty," and Chad and I just show up at a pub, and so do 20 other people, and then we talk about stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's it. And what's actually been great, because I live in England now, and moving out of LA into the countryside in England, I'm now somewhere where if you say you make records, instead of everybody being like, "Oh, really? What are you working on right now?" Because I make records too, and maybe I should have that job. And, well, what are you doing? Now it's like, "Oh, so you mean you don't work?" Like, no, I work really hard. Like, no, you don't. I fell trees for a living. Okay, yes, you're right. You work really hard. I don't. So it's just great to have that perspective all the time. I'm not saving lives. If I don't mix this record, no puppy will die. It doesn't matter. It's super exciting and super important to me, and I think there's nothing more important really than art. But art is a luxury, and if you can't eat, that's a problem. So it's fine for me to not make it as big a deal, and that helps keep me from getting too wrapped up in it.
And there's a lot to be said for the sort of phrase, "There's no such thing as a musical emergency." The world will not stop if that mix doesn't get delivered on.
Yeah, though people sure act like it.
They do, yeah. We're getting to that time of year in New Zealand where it's sort of everyone wants mixes done before Christmas, then everyone goes on holiday.
Yeah.
So no one even listens to it. So you get loads of calls at the start of February. "Oh, my download's expired. Can you please send it me again?" It's like, I thought you wanted it before Christmas. It's that time of year.
Yeah. It's more like I just wanted you to work before Christmas.
Yeah. So we spoke earlier about the about mix stress, about however good and well respected the mix engineer is, sending the mix to a client and waiting for the response.
Oh my
God. Seems to be like it never ends. You think, I'll get to a point in my career where I'll send it off, I'll be utterly confident what I'm sending.
Never.
But every producer I've spoken to, and everyone who's been here on the series, we all get mixed stress.
Total panic.
Yeah.
Yep. And then you carry it around with you. So I sent an entire album's worth of mixes to a band 2 days before I left for here. So that was the Sunday before last. So it's now been a week and a half. I got mixed comments this morning, and there's stuff I need to change, and they want to hear the vocal kind of different on every song on the record and things. So it's not like it's a big party and everybody loves everything I did, but generally I got over the hump. They're not saying like, wow, why does it sound so terrible? It's like, here are the things we want changed. And I realized how much stress I'd been carrying around for the last 10 days because I felt like almost elated that I wasn't fired. Or didn't need to quit because I hated them so much because they hated my mixes. Every single project, absolutely, every single time. It doesn't matter how big the artist, it doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah, and it's that thing about, there's a lot of temptation with working with bigger artists that you somehow need to approach the way that you work differently, when really, it has to be the same for everybody.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you're not stressing, it kind of means you don't really care about it. That's where the stress comes from. It comes from that desire to do the best work that you can do.
Yeah. I mean, one of the worst comments I can ever remember getting was there was a record, and through like a mutual friend, they said it was like a 4-song EP. And could you do this? Indie artist, just the first thing he's ever recorded, but we think it's really great and we'd really love you to mix it. Like, okay. And so they didn't have any money. It was being financed by the guy's dad. And so I mixed the 4 songs, and it was really difficult because it was just inexperienced people doing it. So a lot of the stuff, when you have an experienced producer and a great tracking engineer that's sort of taken care of for you, wasn't there. I'm really having to really work to make this stuff happen. And I sent the mixes, and then the email I got back was like, well, we know because we're not paying a lot that you really didn't put a lot of effort in, but we're really hoping that it would be more like something else. Like,
that's pretty brutal.
Shit. And I'd worked harder on that than I'd worked on, I think it was about the same time I was mixing Green Day, and I put in as much time, and it was harder work than the Green Day mixes. Yeah. And then they're hearing something and just assuming that I wasn't really trying. And it's like, it's so insulting, but at the same time, it's just so depressing. Like, how could I work that hard and send something to them that's so bad that that's what they think? And then it turned out that they just had unrealistic expectations, and it was never going to be what they wanted. But yeah, it's the worst.
Do you remember bad reviews? Do you hold the bad reviews?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah. What's your? If you tell me your worst one, I'll tell you mine.
Well, here, okay, this isn't a review. I mean, I had death threats and all sorts of stuff after Metallica, but the worst.
We'll come on to that in a while. Yeah.
Whatever. Get over it. The worst experience ever playing a mix for an artist was Barry Manilow. Mixed a Barry Manilow record. The first song, we were finishing up overdubs on stuff, so it took 3 days to get to the point where there was something to play on the first song, because we kept having to stop and record saxophone and redo the piano and whatever. And okay, so we finally do this 3 days in, play the mix, start to finish. Barry's sitting behind me, hit stop, complete silence, and then he says, "There is absolutely nothing that I like about this mix."
Yeah.
And I said, "Can I have a minute?" And I went out into the parking lot and I called Debbie and I said, "I think I'm going to have the next 3 weeks free."
Oh, God.
And then, we worked it out, and it turned out it was just the vocal. He hated the lack of reverb on the vocal, but it was destroying everything for him. And so that's by far the worst, in-person reaction I've ever had. I mean, I don't know how you get worse.
Yeah.
Unless someone just physically assaults you.
Yeah. But, you hold those memories, and you sort of it makes you never want to deal with it again.
Oh yeah, I mean, I reread in my head the emails with bad comments and stuff like that. It's the worst.
Yeah, I had the one I remember was his Q magazine review. It was, "Even the silence between the songs sounds overproduced." 1 star.
That's just brutal. I mean, that's brutal. Worse than the fake Spinal Tap ones.
Yeah, it's
2 words.
Shit sandwich. It was my shit sandwich. That review. Yeah, the record sold 500,000 copies. I didn't really give a shit in the end. And I hold the it's just it's But yeah, at the time, I was crushed. Because I thought it was quite a good record.
Yeah.
I was absolutely
And so
crushed.
did 500,000 people.
And so did 500,000 people, yeah. And so did my pack manager. At the
Yeah.
time, but, yeah. So I've got a couple of... we should talk... We'll talk about the Metallica thing in a minute, because it's...
Will we?
It's stuff, you know.
Will we?
We'll do... We'll do a couple little tech questions first. And then we'll do some Q&As. Favourite studios?
Roundhead.
Apart from Roundhead.
Look at Patty.
Right.
Okay.
Apart from Roundhead. I
Apart
suppose
from
you need to mention Mono Valley, obviously. But
Okay,
aside
yeah,
from-
well, and Mono Valley. I mean, it is actually one of my favorite studios. It's a studio where all my gear is. But my gear is there because I'd made a bunch of records there when there was crap gear in, and I still absolutely loved it. Sound City, Studio A, one of the most amazing drum rooms ever. You couldn't get a bad drum. Well, I actually got a bad drum sound in there once, and I had to apologize. But yeah, just an absolutely amazing room. It's now East-West, but it was cello, and before that it was part of Ocean Way. But Studio 2, there's an Altiverb impulse of that live room. That is the Blood Sugar Sex Magic room. It is the I'm With You Chili Peppers room. It's also the first Audio Slave record. That room for drums is just almost as good as Sound City. I don't know other than that, because I've made lots and lots of records in houses and weird places that have turned out to be super cool. So, but those studios are just, they make your life so easy.
Mono Valley, where your gear is a beautiful place. I'd spent 2 years. I didn't have a driving license at the time, so I lived in that building for 2 years, and it is beautiful.
With
right
the
by
ghosts.
the river, and there's a ghost in studio. Room number 3 is haunted, and so I'd never sleep in there. I once spent a whole night there on my own, and I turned all the TVs on in all the rooms and all the lights on, because it's so haunted, that building. It's
Incredible. They exercised it, by the way. It's totally cool. Book it.
Yeah. Pieces of gear you carry with you on every session.
My speakers, that's it.
Right, except for this one.
Tannoys. Yeah, and I didn't even bring those here. No, absolutely nothing. There's nothing that my startup drive, so I've got the plugins that I use or whatever, but yeah, nothing.
Yeah. Be worth just a really quick chat about, do you have any particular mastering engineers you really like to work with? Or because we had quite a long discussion about mastering on the seminar, which I thought was really interesting, about the loudness of the mixes that you deliver to this. Metallica will follow on from this, obviously.
Great.
But,
Can't wait.
Yeah.
My mixes are loud, and basically you get mastering for free. So I need masters who like the way I mix. I mean, that's the thing. You need some, because it's a creative process, and there are an infinite number of ways to mix a track. Therefore, there are an infinite number of ways to master a mix. So you just need someone who has the same aesthetic as you. So, like, I love Chris Bellman, who works at Bernie Grunman's, Eric Boulanger, who's in LA. But I've gotten good results with a lot of people, but a lot of people, the mastering is just a flat transfer. They're basically doing sample rate conversion, because that's all you need to do, because it's already loud and balanced and whatever. It's just become part of the way I mix. They're done. There are still lots of like old school engineers who mix in a way where it needs to be mastered, because it's very quiet and there's not much on. I mean, Nigel Godrich is one of those. His mixes could be done 20 years ago, and they'll fit on half-inch tape without having to uncowl the machine. But that's just not the way I work.
Yeah. So
go on.
So, you made a great answer about, because there's always a question about the loudness wars, right?
Yeah, and the answer is that
if I throw it out to the house, it'll be someone will ask it. Okay, so you might as well sort of preempt the reply, with
I won. That Metallica record won the loudness war. That's what everybody said. And it's actually physically impossible. And by physically, I mean because of physics. You can't have a louder record than that. Yeah. So I win. It's over.
And it was interesting to know that a lot of the streaming platforms have the unmastered version on there.
Maybe.
Oh, I'm not allowed to say, am I?
I don't know.
Right.
Say what? Look, it's too easy to blame people for things or whatever. And we, Greg Fiddleman and I, the two engineers on that record, got publicly blamed by somebody else in the process. And that's just weird.
Yeah.
But whatever. I mean, have a listen to that record on any system, loud or quiet, and it's super aggressive and exciting, I think.
Yeah.
So, and if you don't like it, that's fine, because like we were talking about,
Because they haven't
every
made a good
Metallica and the
record.
fan, they haven't made a good record since Ride the Lightning, right? So, who cares what that one sounds like? What about the 8 in between? I mean, that's what every Metallica fan says when every Metallica record comes
Is
out.
that before the death threats or after the death
It's
threats?
there. It's all in the same email. Yeah.
We'll move on.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's have some questions. Is there a mic knocking around for anybody? Oh yeah. We'll just grab the microphone so we can get it on. I'll give you a chance to edit this afterwards. Don't worry.
It's going to be very short. No.
Right. Who's any? Let's see some hands. None. No one's got a question for Anne. Yes.
There's one. All the way in the back. Great. You get that cord unraveled quick.
I was going to ask you, talking about how people send you mixes where they've taken all the plugins off and flattened everything out. Do you get the opposite, where there are bands now who do so much stuff in the box themselves that they can't get out of the headspace of how they think the record should sound, and that they kind of find it hard to listen to new mixes?
Yep, absolutely. But I think that you can always change it, but keep what's great about what was there. So every once in a while, a mix gig really turns into a mastering gig. It's how do I apply some parallel compression and my 2-bus chain to make the thing they've already done bigger and more exciting and kind of finish the job they started. And then sometimes it's how do I recreate it, because they won't give me what they've already done. And then sometimes it's how do I do something totally different, because that's what I'm hearing. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody's a mixer now, which is cool. I think it's great that you can make a record at home, because there are a lot of super cool records that get made that would never get made if you still had to afford to go into a studio to make records. But at the same time, that means every crap record gets made now too. But that's fine. It's democratized it, and it's there. But yeah, definitely bands mix now, and the only problem is sometimes that can mix you into a corner. Like one thing about most rough mixes is that there's something amazing about them, and there are some horrible problems with them. The simpler the rough mix is, the easier it is to now go do something else. Because it's like, well, okay, it all sounds kind of dark and whatever, but there's something really cool about the vocal being too loud. So you can preserve that while making everything else sound really good. It's harder to do when it's like, oh my God, they've got every single plugin slot taken on every single track, and everything is crushed, and it's doing this incredible thing, but it also sounds like the point of this pen. Like it's tiny, but it's amazing. And so making that work is a much more difficult job, because you really have to unravel things as opposed to just preserve things. But yeah, and every project's different with it. But yeah, absolutely that happens.
Some more questions? Everyone think of questions. This is your only chance.
Hi. Do you think your mixes sound good in the box because they're getting tracked through lots of nice analog kit to start with?
They are in DAW.
Right. Okay.
So this is one of those myths. It's like everything I get to mix is recorded really well.
Right.
It's not true. But look, obviously the source material will make my life easier. But I don't think that my mixes sound great. And part of that is the self-deprecating thing. So, there are a few things I've done that I actually do think sound good. But part of it is the never being satisfied with my own work, which is good because it pushes me to keep trying and stop sucking. But part of it is also that I don't care if they sound good. I care that they feel good. Like if you get done playing somebody something and the first thing they say is, wow, what a great mix, you failed miserably. They need to say, what a great vocal, what a great song, I love this band, whatever. And then say, wow, and it sounds really good. So if I can achieve that, then I'm absolutely fine. So that's much more about the song and the performance and the arrangement and the choices they've made about tempo and key. And then obviously the recording is important as well, but it's like 5th or 6th on the list, really. There are plenty of lo-fi records that are awesome, and there's so many records that get played at every hi-fi show in the world that are the boringest pieces of crap ever, but not everybody can just play Steely Dan all day, so they got to play something else. And I'm exaggerating to make a point, but recording with good gear, if you know what you're doing and you actually capture it well, makes my life super, super easy. But like with that EP I mixed, if I have to struggle to make it great, then I struggle to make it great. And that happens all the time. So, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's a bit of a weird thing to say, well, you're only good because the source material's good. Like, well, really? I hope not. But
I wasn't saying that.
No, I know, but that's the corollary to it. And so when you follow it through, what that does is it gets you to the point where you realize, well, no, it can't be that. Just like I thought all of the gear I was using was the source of all my power. Absolutely. I'm going to stop using $500,000 worth of gear and my mixes are still going to be good. Are you joking? I'm still working. So they must be okay. So there's something about the way I hear things, which is what's important, and how I struggle to use gear or plugins or whatever to make that happen. That's just my day-to-day nightmare. That has nothing to do with what's going to come out of the speakers when I send a mix, I guess.
I mean, one of the great things about more and more engineers, well, pretty much every mix engineer I know now mixes in the box, is we now have access to people like yourself that we wouldn't have before. Budgets are actually, it's possible to get guys like yourself and Chris Sheldon and Chris O'Dowd. It's become much more affordable to do because the overheads are so much smaller.
Yeah.
So it's like, and leading on from the question, it means that everything you're mixing isn't tracked by the best engineers in the best studios. So so it's going to be a harder process because not everything's done on a massive budget. But it's for producers like myself who to have access to great mix engineers has made a huge difference. And now everyone's got a place at the bottom of the garden or somewhere at home. You're instantly taken out. You're not having to hire a studio like this to mix it. And so your budgets are instantly more affordable. So it's amazing how I'll often approach a mix engineer and think, well, they probably never want to do it. And then, yeah, fine. What do you got? What do you got in your budget?
Yeah,
I mean, you can have the discussion, and
that's the negotiation: is how much money do you have? When can I get the files, and when do you need it done by? And if those three things work out, great. And it doesn't matter what the answers to those questions are. It's how does that fit in with the rest of my life?
Yeah. It's where technology has condensed the industry and made it. It's not like Premier League, First Division. There's much more interchangeability between projects and budgets, and
Yeah, but I really do absolutely 100% believe that it has made music better. Like Billie Eilish, I don't even know how to say her name. I'm not a fan of that record musically. Like, that's not something I want to listen to a lot. But it's fucking awesome. It's a great record. And if she had been signed young because she actually, I think there's someone in her family in the music business or whatever, then, okay, maybe she would have made a record anyway, but it would have been in a studio, and would they have let her brother produce it? No. And would she have sung all of her vocals in a bedroom quietly? Would it have been the same? Like, no. That record would be different. It might still be great, because I'm sure she is that talented, because she managed to make that record. But that record got made only because you can make a record on a laptop.
Yeah.
That record would not have been made 10 years ago.
Yeah. I think the industry is in a much healthier place now. It's just, there's lots of cottage industries. You've got an outlet. I mean, when we started making records, the only outlet you had really was through a major record label or a record label with some sort of budget.
Now even I can release records.
And you do.
I do, to their detriment.
Yeah.
But
we've been listening to some of the stuff that you've been releasing. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Some more questions?
And I didn't take that question personally at all. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, Matt, you'll see you outside later.
Yeah, he'll see you outside later.
Sorry.
Hey, I was wondering if there's any sort of limit to the number of times you can listen to a record without getting bored or fatigued, and if so, what steps you might take to, I guess, overcome that.
You mean while working on it?
Yeah.
No, I think there's a limited amount of time you can work on a song consecutively, but that amount of time changes every time you work on it. So when I'm mixing, I might work on a song for 6 hours because I'm inspired and I'm making progress, or I might open it up and hit play and say, nope, not today. And then close it and open up the next one, which is the joy of working in the box, because I open up any song I'm working on and I'm exactly where I left off. So not only do I get to listen fresh, because maybe I haven't worked on it in a couple of days, but I also don't have to remember where I was in the process. Hitting play and listening to it tells me how far along I am. So there are absolutely limits, but I think if you're going to do what we do, you have the ability to listen to a song 50 million times in a row while you're working on it, even if it's a song you're never going to listen to again once you're done. You can do it. There's always something you're grabbing onto to work on to make better. If you're finding you're having a lot of trouble just liking the music you're working on after a certain amount of time, then try and completely change your workflow so that you work on more things at the same time, and don't force yourself to sit and listen to one thing longer than you can take it.
It was interesting, we discussed the other day about when you're mixing albums, you tend to mix on all the tracks.
Yeah, all the time. If I can, I mix the entire album at the same time, and usually in alphabetical order, because that's the way it is in the Finder.
Right. Is that just to... Because I guess, I mean, obviously the albums are somewhat of a lost art, but I mean, for me, I still listen to albums. I download an album on Spotify and listen to it in the order the artist wants me to listen to it in. I never do playlists. That's just because that's the way I was brought up listening to records. But I mean, do you feel that the album is a lost art, or is something you try
No, not really. And I don't. That's not why I mix the whole album at the same time. I mix it at the same time because, well, a few reasons, but one of the reasons is it means I don't have to work on one song. When I get sick of that song, I've got at least 9 more songs, so I can keep working through and working through. So I can get, like, the worst feeling in the world when you're mixing an album on a console is you've just had the elation of printing a mix. Yes! And the very next thing you have to do is prep the next mix. Fuck. I got to assign outputs. I got to write a piece of tape. I got to pull the patch bay. It's the worst. When you're mixing in the box, you spend a couple of days, maybe drunk, prepping all of the songs at the same time, and now you're in a creative spot on every song on the record. Yeah. And you just work on it. So for me, it's the ability to just stop doing one thing and do something else. But at the same time, sometimes you do discover things, and I think it's great to have the context of the entire record, because there are a lot of records where you almost never did it, but I can remember people would always say, like, well, when we're done with this last song, let's recall the first 2, because we really discovered some things about how we're treating the vocal or the way the guitars are working, and I want to do that on those first 2 songs we mixed. You never do that because you're doing them all at the same time. So if you find a really cool vocal effect that works on one song, well, it probably will work on at least one other song on the record or things like that. So that's why I love to do it. It's not to try and make things consistent at all, because I couldn't care less about it being consistent. Yeah. And it's not necessarily to make sure that the album works as a whole. Like, that's the next step for me. Yeah. If I'm producing and I'm going to be sequencing the record, I don't do it until the mixes are done. Yeah. But a lot of artists have the order in their head before you even start recording.
I always find it strange when an artist say, before you even start recording, what do you think about what do you think the running order should be? I'm like, well, I don't know, because there's always a sleeper. There's always a song that, it's kind of a B-side, or we'll just do it because we need to do it, and that's the first single.
Well, it's also the first song on the record is the one that sounds the coolest in the first 5 seconds. Yeah. When you hit play, it's like, oh, wow, what the hell is that? Okay, that's the first song on the record. Yeah, yeah. The second song on the record is the one that sounds good after the first song on the record. It has to be that way. Yeah. Otherwise, it's not a record, it's a playlist. Yeah, and then who cares what order you listen to? Yeah, yeah. That's what I think. Anyway.
Yes.
But we're here for me to say what I think, so I get to do that.
Yes, exactly.
Woohoo!
What else we got, people? Oh. Over here, and then we'll this one, and this one.
Hi. How do you overcome the mixes that never feel finished?
Well, they have to be finished. It's okay. So there's a really easy answer to that. So the mechanism is, while you're working on a mix, imagine playing it for the people you have to play it for, and then write the email that would accompany that mix. And if that email says anything other than, hey, here's the mix, hope you like it, then you're not done with the mix, because you're going to start making excuses for the stuff in the mix that's not happening. And it's a real thing. And I used to actually type the emails, and then those were my mix notes to myself, and I would take care of each one of those things, delete the sentence from the email, and then the email would say, hey, here's the mix, hope you like it. Great, now I'm ready to send it. But what it really means is that you can open it up fresh, which is the first thing. You can't decide a mix is done when you've just been working on it for 3.5 hours. It's impossible. You're only going to hear the stuff that you can remember doing for the last 3.5 hours. So you wake up in the morning, or you work on 2 other songs and come back to it. You go eat dinner, you have 12 beers, whatever you do, you come back fresh, hit play, and if you can make it all the way through without thinking that there's anything you should change, then the mix is done. If there's anything at all that isn't awesome, the mix is not done. That's it.
Do you find that the other test I found is, if someone else is in the room listening to it, you immediately see 10 things that are wrong
Oh,
with
absolutely. I mean, that's the best way to get perspective,
Yeah.
is to play it for somebody else, and preferably not the person who you have to play it for, so you have that chance to fix things.
Yeah.
But getting perspective, however you do it, is the most important thing. And you've got to listen as a listener.
Yeah, yeah,
You can't listen as a mixer.
yeah.
So you've talked about making things explode. Are there
Yes.
specific techniques you use all the time to do that?
Nope. I mean, I use lots of parallel compression on things, so sometimes there'll be an extra parallel compressor on the drums that I'll only use in the choruses. Or I will bump the entire mix up 0.8 dB in the choruses. Or I will ride the drums up 5 dB on the downbeat of the chorus. Or I will add a sub-octave distortion thing to the bass that you can't hear, but you can feel in the chorus, or like whatever. But it's always different. It's always different. There's no... The more specific any question gets, the less useful the answer is, because like I'll try and think of a general thing, and then it turns out, oh right, but there were 9,000 times that didn't work. And then there'll be things you make that work really, really well, and you think, oh my god, I've cracked it. Like, I will definitely do that again. And then it never works again. So it's all about the source material.
So it's more an aesthetic you're going for rather than one specific thing
Yes,
you do.
and what's important is I'm not saying I want the guitars to be louder, or I want the vocal effects to change, or I want the drums to be wider. All I want is for it to feel like it explodes. I have no idea what that means for each mix. It's totally different, but that's what I always want. Like, I realized this about myself about a year ago, talking at one of these things, is that, like, traditionally, drums are always super loud in my mixes. That's a thing. I like kick and snare, they drive it. But I've realized what I'm always trying to do is to make the drums feel like they feel coming out of a PA. When you go to a rock show and the drum tech comes on like a minute and a half before the band comes on, and the guy opens up the PA just for a second, you get boom, 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 and that hits you in the chest like, that's awesome. That's what I want the kick drum to feel like on every single mix I do, unless that's wildly inappropriate, which it sometimes is, but I mean, that's what I'm going for. So it's the feeling I get in front of a PA in an arena with a kick drum with subs and nothing else going on. Like, okay, that's what I want to feel. How you do that is going to be different on every single mix, if you even bother doing that. But it's got to all be about feeling. So everything you're trying to do as a mixer is to make the stuff you wanted to feel when you first started mixing actually happen.
Got it. Sick.
Hi, the point you made before about doing mixes that don't need any mastering because they're already exploding, etc. Do you treat that differently to how you would a mix that is going to go through mastering? Because I mean, the emotional side of it, making it big and everything is one, but there's also the technical side.
No, I don't, and that's why a lot of mastering engineers hate me. But no, I don't. I mean, the mix isn't done until it's done, and when it's done, that's the mix.
All right. Okay.
I think it's really weird to do a mix and then put extra stuff on it before you send it to the band, because you know they're not going to like the mix you did. So you make it really loud and send it to the band. But then once they approve it, you take all that stuff back off. Now it's no longer that mix.
Yeah, sure.
Even if it's just a limiter completely changes the way stuff feels. So then you send it off to a mastering engineer, and it's like, well, they better limit it as much as you did, because otherwise it's not going to feel good. Now, sometimes you might say, I've got a mastering engineer, I love the way he makes stuff sound, and he does stuff the way I do it, but better.
Yeah.
Well, okay, that's great. And if you've got that kind of relationship with somebody, then absolutely. But the idea that there's some pure version of the mix that isn't what everybody's been hearing is very, very strange to me. I hate that. Because then what are you competing with? Like, if you don't send the version you sent to the band to the mastering engineer, they have no idea what they're actually trying to achieve. And then what if you really crushed it when you sent that to the band? Well, now they have to be as loud as that. You can't get back mastering that's quieter than the reference mixes.
Especially if you've won the mastering.
Well, exactly. Thank you. Thanks for... I should get a t-shirt.
We're paying attention,
printed
don't
up.
worry.
So, yeah, it's a difficult thing. But I think, look, if your mixes don't sound good, but they're really loud, okay, so if, like, there are all sorts of problems that really need to be sorted out in mastering, then you have to have headroom to be able to do it. And to just turn the file down and then start working may not be enough for the mastering engineer. Okay. But if all they want is a dB of headroom because they want to add some EQ, then turn my mix down a dB. That's fine. I don't care. You're going to be basically turning it back up, but only at certain frequencies. I mean, that's what EQ does. So just like get on with it and make it sound the way you want it to sound. And then, to be fair, I do sometimes print quieter versions of mixes that nobody gets to hear except the mastering engineer. So like, here's the mix. I think this is fine. You complained, so here's one where I dump the input to the final limiter by 3 dB. Now you've got more room. But it has to be at least as exciting as what I sent you.
Cool. Thanks.
Do you So I've noticed with a lot of mix, like the reference mixes the band get, a lot of mastering guys like to have that as well now, so they can avoid that issue of it
right,
being
which is
quieter.
why there's no that's the mix is the mix is the mix.
Yeah, yeah.
There is no reference mix that's different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Keeps it simple.
Yeah.
Sort of two questions. The first one is, when did you feel like you got confident in the moves you were making while mixing?
Never.
Never?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not kidding about the being super stressed out when I sent that record 10 days ago and realizing that I've been stressed out about it and kind of depressed the whole time. Because it's like that weight of thinking you may have failed miserably with somebody's art, which is their life. I haven't gotten over that. I mean, I think I'm more confident than I was 20 years ago, but I'm not very confident.
And then the second one is taming bass, like especially when you're moving it. If you're doing like a funk track, for example, where it's playing on multiple octaves, you got the feel of the low when it goes lower octaves, and then it becomes nearly inaudible, and then vice versa, when it goes high, you don't have the feel. So maybe some techniques to combat that.
I mean, that's a really specific question, so it's hard to know exactly, but I think like on a reggae track, it comes up a lot as well. What you need to do is decide who's driving the low end. And so if the bass is all over the place, then you can't let the bass drive the low end. It's got to be the kick drum, because that will be more consistent. And then you also have to decide, like, should there be some constant low end or should there be rhythmic low end? And if it's cool to have the rhythmic low end, well, great. Your kick drum does it, end of story. And just don't make the bass too boomy. But if that doesn't work, now you've got to like look for a keyboard or a guitar or something that's got low end, so you can at least get some low mids that don't go away. But that's like an aesthetic choice for you about whether you can deal with the low end changing or not. But I mean, there's no trick to it. You've got to find somebody who can create the low end. Because if you used like a subharmonic synthesizer on the bass when he went up the octave, that's just going to sound weird. So your low end will be consistent, but everything else about it's going to suck. So you just have to kind of decide and see what you can get away with. The other thing is that, like, I build most of my mixes with the drums really loud. But sometimes you've got to say, well, all right, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to build this mix with the guitars really loud because they will be consistent all the way through the mix, and that's important. And then everybody else can move around within that framework. So you just create a sonic universe for the song that might be totally different than everything else you've ever done.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed on the last few days is how cerebral you are about mixing.
I overthink everything.
There's moments of like sheer technical craziness, but deeply, really the core of the mix is feel and explosion and cerebral, and that really surprised me because I thought it would be that your process would be much more technical than it is.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be, right? Because the end result you're trying to get is a feeling. So, I said in the seminar, one of the definitions for art is something that one person makes that elicits an emotional response in another person without them having to be there. And that applies the other thing is, some people say art is what you do when you're bored, but that's a totally different thing. But so that can cover music. So the idea is you've got some recording of some music that you want people to feel sad or happy or angry or whatever it is. And so to achieve that, the mix needs to feel a certain way. It doesn't need to sound a certain way. It doesn't have to have any low end if you can get the emotional response without it. But once you've said, I want this to feel like it explodes, now all you have are technical tools to change the bits and make emotion come out of the speakers. So it has to become a technical job at some point. You can't just feel your way around compressors and EQs. Yeah. You're never going to get anywhere. It's going to sound terrible. So you have to be technical and cerebral to understand when you're totally screwing something up by doing something technically really horrendous, but also realize that there is no right answer to any of it because you're going for a feel. Yeah. So it's a weird balancing act. But the technical side is just like the little book in your head that tells you how to do the emotional stuff, I think.
I mean, it was really interesting to see you often express that you're sort of the fear and how terrified you are of things. But when I listen to your mixes, they sound like completely fearless. It's like you just do crazy shit that I just like. How can you do that and get away with it? And it was like
you don't always get away with it, but
or maybe just you're playing in the ones where you playing us the mixes you did get away with it on, but it's
I don't know. I think you can, like, there was someone in the seminar today and we were listening to something they'd done and it sounded really, really cool, but the kick drum could have been louder. Like that would have, I think, made it a bit more exciting to listen to. And the response was, well, but I don't, I'm not that experienced with mixing. I don't have like the best control room, so I don't want to go nuts with the low end. Like I just need to have it be controlled. Like, well, but no, you don't. Let it be crazy. And so my thing now, certainly, and this is over the last however many years, is if I hear the germ of something that could be way too loud, I'm like, oh, great. I get to make this thing really stick out and be an event. And that's exciting. if it doesn't get in the way of the song and it doesn't destroy things. And, and it could be that the artist hears that and like, well, why is that thing so loud? What are you doing? And then you get rid of it, and that's fine. But it's to take the opportunity to do something memorable.
Yeah.
You certainly would do that as a musician. You would do it as a performer. You probably would do it as a producer. So why would you not do it as a mixer? 2, why would you not put reverb on the bass in the middle 8? Because it makes it super stereo and swimmy if that sounds really cool and bizarre. Great.
Fearless.
Yeah, and then you curl up in a ball and think that they're going to hate it.
Yeah, and then they don't, and then it's all good.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's probably a good place to wrap it up. But before I do, I forgot to thank SAE, Dave and the guys at SAE, one of our main sponsors here. Sorry, Dave, I forgot to mention you earlier on. Sorry, that's terrible. Some of you might be coming to the seminar on Sunday. We've got Mark Rankin, who's our visiting producer next week. Also,
Who's
Joel
awesome.
Little's going to join us. I'm sure you got to field lots of Taylor Swift questions, but he's ready for it. So if you've got tickets for Sunday, come along. It is sold out, but just if any more come available, we'll let you know. And jump on the New Zealand Music Producers Facebook page and join them. You get all the updates, and we'll put up some photos and some links to the seminars. And I just want to really thank Andrew for coming down. It's a long way, and we're really glad to have you here. It's just been incredible having you down
Thanks
here for
for
the
having
week. I know. So we will drink some more beer and we'll talk some more stuff and we'll put the worlds to rights. And
Beer.
but thank you. Let's have a big hand, please, for
Thanks.
amazing Andrew Scheps.